I'm going to go ahead and post this forum post that I wrote in the chat for folks that might want to read along. There's a lot of content that was written about the different scenarios, so it might be helpful for conversation or for getting more depth. It's also linked in the slides there, which we'll post later. So these questions originally came from Dietrich. We were hoping that they would be able to attend today, but they're not able to. So this is a even more synthesized conversation with myself than the forum post, which was also with myself. We hope that others join with that, but more important is that we publish the information that gets out there so folks can benefit from this. So the first question that came up for user management was, what's the best practice for retiring a user and then replacing them with another? So in this context, you would have a CHW that's leaving your organization and that you want to onboard another one. And the best practice is the first option, which is to create a new contact and then a new user. So the contact is on the CHT side and the user is created in the admin side. And then to create that or to parent that contact to the existing CHW's place. So what this means is that you don't have any confusion as to when the transition happened between CHWs. And there's very clean data that both a human can tell by looking at the CHT records, and as well when you run something like Couch to PG to exfiltrate the data to Postgres, this changeover can be discerned very easily. It also is very secure so that you can change the password from the old user and they can't log in again, and the new user can see all the old existing patient records that's in the CHT, and it allows for a clean transition. It also involves probably maybe the most amount of work, right? Because you have to create the new records. Next up, we have editing the existing contact and user and place. So what this would mean is that instead of creating a new record, you're just going to reuse all the records in place. You would change names for the contact, maybe change phone numbers as needed. The user name itself is actually immutable. That is, you can't change it after it's been created. So that would have to stay the same, but the printable name, the name that you can enter in for the human that's attached to that user, could be changed. So you'd have this dissonance of a username that's separate from the human name, and then you could change the place name as well if you wanted. There's a lot of drawbacks to this because if you forget to change the password for the old user, then they can still log in. Rather, you change the password and have to log in again. But it is a little bit easier. And then speaking of easier, the last option is by far the easiest, but the least best, which is you can take the phone from the old CHW and hand it to the new one and be done. Hopefully you change the password and then re-log in. In this scenario, there's very little visibility into when the user handoff changed, and potentially, again, no good security, because if you forget to change that password, then the user can still log in. The old user can still log in. This is something that happens a lot in the field. This is something that happens often organically, and partners may try to solve the problem the best. So we tried to be very thorough in documenting what the processes are and how you can improve them. We're also going to be talking later in this presentation about new changes that we're going to make to the CHT that we hope to even make this better and easier, less steps, more secure. Another topic that came up was, what's the best practice for managing large list of users, surnames, telephones, villages, anything that you need to create a user. And ultimately, there's a tough balance between gathering all the information and potentially creating a password that is maybe based off the username and then some identifying digits. So it could be Mr. Jones and the password might be CHW123. And the next one could be Sam and the password could be CHW321, etc. This is a bad practice, but tempting. The better practice is to use magic links. Magic links are a way of easily sending a link to the device based off of an SMS gateway that the CHT is configured to use. And then this way, as each user is created, the device will get a link. You can click the link and you're logged in. There's never a password that's written down. There's never a password that's printed out. Not everyone has an SMS gateway set up. The other way of doing this more securely is to create a random password for each user that you create off of your spreadsheet and enter into the CHT. And then as you're provisioning the device, that is, as you're logging them in, go into the CHT and change that user's password right then and there. Again, this alleviates the pain of and the security risk of having the password be printed and potentially seen by someone who shouldn't. So there was the last question which came up, which was, what's the best management practices of medium to large deployments? And I think there was some hope that there would be good discussion around the other items that weren't discussed. So already we've discussed what are the practices of replacing a CHW and what are the practices for gathering up a large list of CHWs. And I didn't come up with anything new aside from what was already covered. So I'm kind of putting this out to you as the forum members and as our partners who have practices that we no doubt missed. We'd love to hear from you. So the forum link that I put in the chat and that's on the slide, we welcome any extra questions or any maybe oversights that we assumed were working and are not. We'd love to hear from you.
So during last month's roundup call, we highlighted a few features that were planned for 3.14 but hadn't been released yet. And about 2 weeks ago, 3.14 was officially released, and we just wanted to make sure everyone was aware and give you a quick summary. Actually, let me just share those are the release notes. And yeah, so 3.14 includes 7 new features or improvements. I just wanted to highlight a couple of those were improvements around the sync status dialog when users manually trigger a sync. There's also an improvement around how tab labels show even on small screens. There was an improvement around how we display dates when the locale is set as Nepali, and a bunch of other great improvements as well that you can read about in the release notes. There were also 9 technical improvements and 24 bugs fixed. So yeah, go ahead and check out the release notes and the documentation site for the full details and reach out in the forum if you have any questions. The next thing that we want to chat about was just give you a little bit of a recap on the app learnability initiative that we introduced in the last call as well. So yeah, just as a quick recap, we've been testing the concept of in-app tutorial cards to understand if users can begin to use new features in the CHT on their own without in-person training. So we're working on this because we've heard feedback that upgrading is difficult when there are changes to the user interface, and many implementers feel like they have to do in-person training even for sort of minor changes to the interface. So our goal here is that you'll be able to confidently roll out user-facing changes without requiring in-person training. The screenshot you see here is what the first version of the prototype looked like. You can see that there's an intro card, that first small little card there, some content that introduces a new button, and then there's a confirmation card. So that's kind of what that first version of the prototype looked like. And we did a little demo of that last month. Next slide, please. Cool. So using that first version of the prototype, we organized some video calls with several current CHT users. These users knew that they were participating in a usability test of potential new features for the CHT, but they weren't really briefed on what the actual scenario was going to be or told anything about it having to do with training or app learnability. We set up the scenario by telling users that their app had just been upgraded and they are logging in for the first time after the upgrade. And then we shared our screen with the first page of the prototype showing, and we asked users to explain what they saw, what they were thinking, and what would they tap on the screen. And then we would actually do the tapping on whatever they told us to tap on. So the first part of the session really related specifically to the cards to kind of see if users understood what they were seeing and how to interact with those cards. And the second part really tested whether or not they learned the skill that we were trying to train on. So we did this by asking them to complete an activity in the CHT that would use the knowledge that they had acquired from the cards. So after running 6 or 8 interviews, we then synthesized our findings by preparing what's called an affinity map. So you can see on the screenshot on the right is an example of what one of these affinity maps looks like. So basically each of the little colored squares represents a challenge or success that one of the users experienced while they were taken through the prototype. And then we grouped all of those successes and challenges by sort of specific themes. For example, if users had an issue related to certain types of cards, we grouped those colorful stickies all together. And then after grouping all of those things by themes, we identified potential solutions to address those challenges. And then based on this, we would then update the prototype and test again. Next slide, please. Cool. So there were two main themes that really stuck out that we wanted to address from that affinity map. So the first was that users just weren't that familiar with the concept of the training cards and were getting a little bit stuck. So we addressed this by simply improving some of the text on the cards and really giving a detailed explanation on the first card, telling users what they were about to see. So the updated version of the card now says, there have been some changes to your app. The next few screens will explain what those changes are. Please read the screen carefully and tap next if you understand. If you need extra support, please contact your supervisor. So it's important to point out that the content of these cards will be configurable, but we still wanted to prove that users could use the cards independently without help from anyone else. Next slide. The other big theme that really stuck out related to the screenshots in the card. So we found that several users wanted to interact directly with the screenshots. So they were actually trying to tap on the screenshots themselves to perform certain actions. So the updated version of the prototype included a lot clearer text in what they were seeing. We have like a before and after comparison on 2 different little screens. And we pulled out the individual components of the things that changed rather than including a sort of full image of the app. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, after we updated the prototype, we tested it again. During the second round, we tested with some new users who were seeing this for the first time. And we also tested with some of the users who saw the first version, but trained them on a different UI change. So they were familiar with the card concept from the first round, but the content in the cards related to a totally different UI change as compared to the first time. In all scenarios, those UI changes were hypothetical. So the screenshot here is essentially where we landed. And we have that very, very detailed first card really setting up what they're about to see. You can see some before and after screenshots of the components and the summary card, just making sure they understood everything. Of course, like I said, the content of these cards will be configurable and depend on what changes are actually being rolled out, but our tests validated that users are able to see these training cards to independently learn new skills in the app. Since the cards will be configurable, they can actually be used to train on other things as well, not just updates to the user interface. So for example, if you simply wanted to retrain users on existing features, we anticipate that you'd be able to do that with the cards as well. So there are a few main ways that you can help out if you want to get involved, one of which is just by connecting us with more users that we can interview. We want to learn more about users' needs. So if you, and if your project, if you want to connect us and allow us to chat with some of your users, we'd love to do that. If you're interested in potentially deploying this card feature in your project, definitely reach out as well. For the first few implementations of this feature, we'll work closely with you to understand and design what the content for the card should look like. And since it's a new feature, we expect to rapidly iterate, sort of real time, based on what we're seeing in the field. And you'll need to get these to get this new feature, you would first need to upgrade to the latest version of the CHT, and then we'll create the small feature releases that basically just includes the new card functionality. So I will actually, there's a forum post on the cards as well. I will drop that in the chat here. Oh, and I see there's some questions. But yeah, definitely reach out if you're interested in helping out, or if you're interested in deploying this feature when it's ready, and we'd be excited to pair with you on that. Sorry.
Questions about, can you use this for configuration or any other updates you want to provide to a user?
Gotcha. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that's we would expect to be able to do that. Is like sort of other, if it was a config change, or like I said, if you wanted to kind of if you identified some challenges users were having in a certain area of the system, you would be able to create some content that would sort of retrain users on something or remind them about something. So that's how we expect this to work. So we're just starting to kick off the development soon. So, but that's our expectation.
Great, thanks, Sam. So I'm going to give more links to everyone. This is a link that is a pair to Michael's feature testing for user creation testing. Before we get to that though, let's briefly review the existing process for adding users. Right now it's split. To add a bulk set of users, if you say have more than 100 or thousands or however many, you would use the CHT conf, which is a command line utility. And this allows you to consume a CSV and then map it to the correct user, contact, and user place records. It often involves generating UUIDs for places and then matching those back to users. There's another way of doing this through the API as well. You can see I've linked these to the documentation for this process, which you can get on the slides later. The other process is a more manual process and is for creating individual users. Again, you would have to create the place and then the contact, and then go into the administrative section of the CHT and then choose the place and the contact that you just created, giving them a role and giving them a password. This is the process as it exists today, and we're looking at improving this. So on the next slide, please. This is a possible feature that we might be adding that would allow an administrator to add users in a more bulk process. So like the app learnability cards that Michael was talking about, this feature came out of talking to partners about problems that they have or areas that have friction in terms of the number of steps that are involved. There's also an awareness that maybe having CHWs that can't get an account created is a blocking process. So we're trying to iterate closer to a more distributed process that can be done by a number of people as opposed to one person. So this interface that we're looking at here is still in the administrative area. So you still need to be a privileged CHT user as opposed to maybe something like an offline supervisor, but it greatly reduces the number of steps that you need to do because we're taking all three of the records that you need, the contact, the user, and the place, and we're smushing that into this easy to access form here. So starting at the top, you would select where you would like to add these users. And this is going to be the type ahead interface in terms of the place. In the hierarchy, this would be the parent of the place for the CHW, for example. Or if you have a deeper hierarchy, then wherever in the hierarchy that you may want to be creating them, if you're creating supervisors or anyone else. Then you would select the place type. The CHT has a configurable hierarchy, so we need to be aware of all the different combinations that are needed to successfully create the users. Then what role that would this set of users that you're creating have? So just to be clear, the assumption is that you're going to be creating chunks of like users. So you wouldn't have user one in this row here in the tabular layout have a different role than the other users. So if you had different roles, then you would load up the form and configure it differently for that set of users. After that, you have this set of 5 columns that you would then fill out for each user and go ahead and create them. The hope is that, as I said, this will be a faster process and that we've streamlined removing any extra fields that are needed, and that if you need to go back and fill them out, you can still do that through the manual process. One thing that we're not seeing here is SMS integration, which I spoke to earlier as a best practice. This is something that we're intentionally leaving out initially with the hopes that we can get early feedback through the feature release concept that Michael spoke to. And as we get feedback, then we can add things like possibly a checkbox where if you have the SMS gateway involved deployed, that you would remove the password column and send magic links to each of these CHWs, supervisors, or whoever that you're creating. As I mentioned, there's a forum post. We'd love to get feedback. We'd love to bring folks on to the feature release as it comes out. And that is the link there. So along with the feature release that will cover the user creation and also the app learnability, these are some upcoming features that we're working on as well. So there's 2 tickets around DHIS2 integrations that we're assessing the impact of. So one is to simply automate the process. Right now, in order to get DHIS2 exports working, you need to export them from the CHT, you have the file locally, and then import them into DHIS2. So we would have some automation around that. And then some additional reporting period granularity. Right now, the CHT assumes a month reporting period. So having that be possibly down to a day or up to a quarter. The CHT comp version that is shipped in the CHT core is out of date, so that will be upgraded as well. And also will follow the rename from Medic Comp to CHT Comp. There's a bug around login, and it also can create an empty modal where when you log in, you might see the privacy policy twice. So while not that common because most CHWs work within a logged in context, it is still a pain. And there is some, I'm smiling now because this last one was the output of someone unintentionally upgrading their CHT instance. We want to make the CHT very easy to upgrade, but not quite so easy that it's done accidentally or without permission. So adding an extra layer of permission around that so you can get to the admin section of the CHT, but not to the upgrade section. Each of these has links, so you can look at the tickets. We always try to operate in the open so that folks can see what we're up to. And the and more link is going to link to the 315 milestone. So you can see all the tickets that are currently, hopefully, going to be in 315, which is the next version.
And on the presentations or on products, the final thing here is something that's coming up or that's in the works. I don't think Aidan is here, but I'll just mention a few things, and there will be a chance to discuss this a bit more and to get deeper into what this means, either on the forum or in the future in following calls. So Couch2PG, which is what we've been using to set up analytics and set up dashboards for the different CHT deployments, is going to be replaced with something new that has some significant improvements that would, amongst other things, help us move towards real-time data streaming. We had challenges with the time it took to have updates to the data that's being displayed on dashboards. This is in line with, or the tools that are being used are in line with our philosophies of having open source tools that already exist and that are available to everyone. And there's decoupling of materialized views. Those who've worked with Couch2PG before would understand what this means, but again, there'll be a chance to discuss this and elaborate further. So decoupling materialized views from data streaming, resulting in less risky software updates. And I believe everyone here understands what less risky software updates means. And there is a GitHub link to that, github.com/medic/CHT-sync. Again, this will be available in the PDF that we share after the call. Unless there are any questions, there's one more thing I'd like to add on this, and this is that the CHT roadmap is now available on GitHub. And here you'll see some of the activities that are planned for, and some idea of what's happening now, what's coming up next, and what's coming up later. From here, you may get an idea of what's in the works, and you're welcome to share feedback or comments on what's being worked on the forum, and those are definitely welcome.